The moving truck rumbled down Maple Lane on a bright spring morning, its tires crunching over neatly paved streets, lined with trimmed hedges and white mailboxes. Curtains twitched as neighbors peeked out. Willow Creek was the kind of suburb where new arrivals were always noticed, and the man unloading crates from the truck was not what most of them expected. Jamal Carter stood tall and broad-shouldered, his hands calloused from years of working stone. He wore a simple t-shirt dusted with chalk from the studio he had left behind in the city. His smile was easy, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had carved his way through more than marble. He had come to Willow Creek for peace. After years of cramped apartments and the endless hum of traffic, he longed for quiet mornings, open skies, and space to work. The modest two-story house at the end of Maple Lane had a wide backyard, perfect for the outdoor studio he dreamed of. By the second day, neighbors gathered small details. He was single, polite, always waved. He spent hours in the garage and backyard, moving heavy blocks of stone, metal rods, and tools. Some said it was fascinating. Others frowned, whispering over fences about noise and a workshop in a residential area. Jamal ignored the murmurs. He had work to do. From the very first night, under the dim glow of a hanging bulb, he began sketching the design that had lived in his mind for years. Two great hands rising from the earth, reaching upward, fingers stretched toward one another, but not yet touching. To him, it was a story in stone, of struggle and unity, of longing and hope. His grandmother's voice guided him, as it always did when he worked. She used to tell him, "Boy, these hands been through the fields, through the fire, through all of it. You take what we carried and make it mean something Jamal had promised her he would." The first strikes of his hammer against stone rang through the quiet suburb. Children riding bikes slowed to watch, eyes wide as the shape began to emerge from the block. Some neighbors smiled despite themselves, curious, but others muttered about property values and rules. Jamal wiped sweat from his brow and stepped back, studying the beginnings of the sculpture. The sun caught the rough outline, casting long shadows across the grass. He could already see what it would become: a symbol, a story, a landmark, though he didn't know it yet. For now, it was just a block of stone in a quiet backyard, and a man determined to carve something greater than himself. The sound of hammer against chisel had barely echoed through Willow Creek for 2 weeks before the first objections arrived. At first, they were disguised as pleasantries. A neighbor watering her roses called over the fence, "That's quite a project you've got there. How long do you think it'll take?" Her smile was polite, but her eyes lingered on the massive stone form with something closer to unease than admiration. Another stopped by with a plate of cookies. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said, glancing past Jamal to the sculpture. His voice dropped. "Careful, though. The HOA has rules about structures. Wouldn't want you to get in trouble." The words sounded like kindness, but the warning lay sharp beneath them. By the third week, the whispers had reached Karen Whitfield, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. She was known for her immaculate lawns, her ironed blouses, and her talent for weaving concern into command. When she visited, clipboard in hand, she didn't bother with cookies. "This thing," she said, gesturing toward the stone, "isn't in compliance with HOA guidelines. No large, unsightly structures are permitted without prior approval." Jamal set down his tools. Sweat streaked his forehead, but his voice was calm. "It's a sculpture, not a shed. It's art." Karen's smile was tight, brittle. "Art is subjective. What matters is how it affects the neighborhood. We pride ourselves on a certain... Look." Behind her, two neighbors nodded as if rehearsed. One muttered, "Doesn't fit here." Jamal felt the words as he had felt them many times before, the unspoken layers beneath the surface. Not about the stone, not about the rules, about him. "I'm not finished," he said evenly. "When it's done, maybe you'll see it differently." Karen scribbled something on her clipboard. "We'll see," she said curtly. "But don't be surprised if the HOA takes action. We can't let one man's project bring down everyone's property value." She left with the click of her heels on the sidewalk, the sound as final as a gavel. That night, Jamal worked later than usual, the street lamps casting long shadows across the stone. His hammer struck harder, his vision burning clearer. Two hands rising, reaching for one another, refusing to be pulled down. The first objections had come. He knew they wouldn't be the last. By midsummer, the statue's form was undeniable. The two great hands were rising from the stone, fingers curling, knuckles defined, reaching skyward with raw strength. Even unfinished, it commanded the yard, a presence that couldn't be ignored. And the neighborhood had noticed. Some avoided eye contact altogether. Jamal would wave from his driveway, but curtains would twitch shut, or neighbors would busy themselves sweeping already clean porches. Others muttered as they walked past, their voices carrying just enough to sting. Ugly thing, ruining the street's look. Who does he think he is, bringing that here? Should have stuck to a lawn gnome. On more than one morning, Jamal found anonymous flyers slipped into his mailbox, photocopied HOA rules highlighted in yellow, with handwritten notes, remove it or not allowed. He tossed them into the trash without reply, though each one lodged like a splinter. Still, there were moments of quiet resistance to the silence. Children were the first to break ranks. They peeked over fences, their faces pressed between wooden slats, whispering, "Look, it's a hand!" They would linger on the sidewalk, pointing, their eyes wide with wonder. Some even mimicked the sculpture, raising their arms to the sky in play until their parents dragged them home. And then there was Mr. Alvarez, the elderly man who lived 3 houses down. He rarely spoke, but one morning Jamal found a small bundle on his porch, chisels wrapped in a worn cloth, along with a note written in shaky handwriting. Keep building. The stone will outlast their rules. The gesture hit Jamal harder than he expected. He stood in his workshop, turning the chisels in his hands, the tools carrying years of use, of struggle, of faith. It was a reminder that art had allies, even in quiet corners. But the tension only grew heavier. Cars slowed when passing his house, drivers staring as if the statue were a trespasser. Conversations hushed when Jamal walked into the corner store. The weight of being watched pressed on him like the summer heat, constant, suffocating. One evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the unfinished stone in gold, Jamal leaned on his hammer, sweat dripping down his neck. He could hear his neighbors gathered on the sidewalk across the street, their words sharp, deliberate. It's lowering our property values. It makes us look bad. It doesn't belong here. He closed his eyes. The words cut, but when he opened them again, the sculpture loomed before him. Proud, unfinished, unyielding. The hands reached upward, as if defying gravity itself. And Jamal knew. He wasn't carving stone alone anymore. He was carving against silence, against fear, against the walls his neighbors wanted to build around him. The block was tense, the stairs heavy, but his vision was heavier still. It started with the children. A group of them, backpacks bouncing, stopped each afternoon on their way home from school. They would cluster on the sidewalk, whispering to each other, eyes fixed on the rising stone hands. One brave girl asked Jamal, "Mister, is it going to be finished soon?" "Not soon," he replied with a smile, wiping dust from his forehead. "But one day, big things take time." The next day, she returned with 2 friends. By the end of the week, a dozen kids lingered outside his yard, watching the sculpture take shape as though it were magic. Their teachers noticed. One Saturday, Miss Henderson, the local art teacher, brought her class on an unofficial field trip. The children sat cross-legged on the grass as Jamal showed them his tools and explained how stone carried memory. "Every chip you take away reveals what was waiting inside," he told them. The students scribbled in notebooks, wide-eyed, sketching the unfinished statue as if it already belonged in their textbooks. Parents soon followed. A mother knocked on Jamal's door one evening, holding her son by the shoulder. "He hasn't stopped talking about your sculpture," she said, embarrassed but smiling. "Would you mind if he comes by to watch now and then? He says he wants to be an artist too." Word spread beyond Maple Lane. Photos began to appear on social media. Not grainy shots of the eyesore, but luminous pictures of the stone catching the sunset, with captions like "Hands of Willow Creek" and "Hope Rising on Maple Lane." The hashtags multiplied. "Hands of Willow Creek," "Let Art Stand." Then, came the farmer's market. Jamal walked through one Sunday to buy fruit, and more than a few people stopped him. "That statue you're building," said Mrs. Nguyen, the baker, "it reminds me of family. It's beautiful. Don't let them tear it down." She pressed a bag of rolls into his hands and refused his money. The tide was turning, small voices growing louder, like a chorus forming. The HOA grumbled louder in response, but now they were no longer the only voices. One night, Jamal returned home to find candles flickering at the base of the sculpture. Someone had left a bouquet of wildflowers there, along with a note scrawled on scrap paper. "We see you. We're with you. Keep going." Jamal stood in the glow of the candles, his chest tight, his throat thick. For weeks, he had felt the weight of hostility pressing in. Now, for the first time, he felt something else pressing back. Not silence, not suspicion. Support. And though the statue still stood unfinished, the hands seemed to rise taller that night, reaching not only upward, but outward, toward a town beginning, slowly, to reach back. The HOA meeting was held on a muggy Thursday evening in the Willow Creek Community Center, a beige building with buzzing fluorescent lights and folding chairs that creaked under the weight of gossip. Usually, only a handful of residents attended, bored faces listening to budget updates and lawn maintenance reminders. But that night, every chair was filled, and people stood along the walls, their voices hushed but electric. At the front sat the board, a long table draped in white, with Karen Whitfield in the center, like a judge presiding over trial. Her suit was immaculate, her papers stacked neatly in a folder marked in red. She tapped a manicured nail against the wood, waiting for silence. "This meeting," she began, her tone sharp and rehearsed, "concerns the violation of HOA guidelines by resident Jamal Carter." She let the words hang heavy. "Specifically, the unauthorized erection of a large, unsightly structure, a statue, in clear breach of community standards." A murmur rippled through the room. Karen adjusted her glasses and continued. "We must consider the impact on property values, on neighborhood harmony, on the aesthetic of Willow Creek. This statue is divisive, disruptive, and it does not align with the vision we have for our community." She sat down to polite applause from a small cluster of her loyal supporters. Then Jamal rose. He didn't bring folders or charts. He wore a simple shirt dusted faintly with stone, as if he had come straight from his work. He walked to the microphone, his footsteps steady, his shoulders squared. "I've been told my sculpture doesn't belong here," he began, his voice low but clear. "That it's disruptive, that it divides us. But this piece isn't about division. It's about reaching." He paused, letting the word hang in the silence. Two hands rising upward, strained, imperfect, but reaching for one another anyway. He looked out at the crowd. "I built it because of my grandmother. Her hands carried scars from picking cotton in fields she never chose to enter. She used to tell me, 'Boy, you make sure these hands mean something someday.' That's what I'm doing. Not breaking rules, not causing trouble, just carving meaning into stone." For a moment, the room was still. Then a voice broke the quiet. "He's telling the truth." It was Miss Henderson, the art teacher. She stood with her students clustered around her. "My kids have learned more from watching him work than they ever could in a classroom. That statue has inspired them." Another voice followed, louder. "He's right. That statue saved my boy." Heads turned. It was the mother who had brought her son weeks before. He was lost after his dad passed. He found hope standing in front of those hands. "Don't you dare call that divisive!" The floodgates opened. A farmer stood to describe leaving chisels at Jamal's door. Children lifted handmade posters with sketches of the rising hands. A teenager shouted, "Hands of Willow Creek is trending!" People outside this town are already proud of it. Even Mr. Alvarez, stooped with age, pushed himself upright with a cane. His voice trembled but carried, "That stone will stand longer than any of us. Let it stand with pride." The chamber erupted in claps and cheers, so loud the walls seemed to shake. Karen banged her gavel, her smile cracking. Order! Order! But the voices were no longer hers to silence. Jamal stood quietly, watching as the people of Willow Creek spoke for him. For the first time, he realized the statue wasn't his alone anymore. It belonged to the town, whether the HOA admitted it or not. The air in the community center felt heavy, charged with the echo of clapping and voices that refused to be silenced. Karen Whitfield's gavel struck the table again and again, but the crowd only settled reluctantly, like a storm, unwilling to move on. She adjusted her papers, her lips drawn thin. "Thank you for your input," she said, her tone brittle. "But this board must make its decision based on facts, not feelings." The words landed with a thud, and a murmur of disapproval rippled across the room. The mayor of Willow Creek, sitting at the far end of the table, cleared his throat. He was not a man of many words, but that night his eyes lingered on Jamal longer than usual. "This board has heard both the complaint and the defense. We will now vote." Karen raised her hand first. "Remove the statue," she said crisply. Two of her closest allies followed without hesitation. But when the vote turned to the other members, hesitation cracked through their composure. "I've seen what it means to the kids," one board member said softly. "It stays." "My mother hasn't stopped talking about it," another admitted. "It stays." The votes split, each declaration pulling the room tighter, until the mayor leaned forward, hands folded. "It comes down to me," he said. A hush fell over the chamber. "I've lived in Willow Creek for 40 years. I've seen this town struggle to find its heart more than once. And I'll tell you what I see in that statue. Not division, not disruption. I see hope. I see hands reaching, not pulling apart. That's what I want for Willow Creek." He raised his hand. "The statue stays." The room erupted. Cheers burst from the back rows. Children leapt to their feet. Parents hugged one another, and even a few who had stayed silent clapped cautiously, swept along by the tide. The words spread like fire. "It stays. It stays." Jamal sat very still, the sound washing over him. His chest tightened, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. After weeks of whispers, stares, and threats, the verdict had come down not in his favor alone, but in favor of the work itself, in favor of what it meant. Across the table, Karen's face hardened. She gathered her papers quickly, her jaw clenched, but she said nothing more. The gavel struck one last time to close the meeting, but the people barely heard it. Their voices were louder now, freer. When Jamal stepped out into the night, the summer air felt lighter. Neighbors surrounded him, shaking his hand, clapping his back, even asking if they could bring flowers to place at the base once the statue was finished. Children darted around his legs, raising their arms to the sky like the stone hands they had grown to love. And Jamal, for the first time since he had arrived in Willow Creek, allowed himself to believe this sculpture would stand. Not just in his yard, not just in stone, but in the heart of the town. By autumn, the statue was complete. The two hands towered from the earth, their stone fingers reaching skyward, caught forever in the moment of striving toward each other. Every line, every chisel mark, bore Jamal's sweat and patience. The sun traced shadows between the knuckles at dawn, and in the evening the last light of day turned the hands gold. At first, people came out of curiosity. Neighbors who once scowled over fences now lingered on the sidewalk, snapping photos with their phones. Joggers paused to rest beneath it. Children climbed the pedestal, pretending the hands were lifting them toward the clouds. Then came visitors from beyond Willow Creek. Cars slowed as they passed down Maple Lane. Strangers stopped to ask about the statue they'd seen online. Couples posed in front of it, engagement rings flashing. Teachers arranged field trips. The Willow Creek Gazette ran a front-page story, "Hands of Willow Creek, from controversy to community." Even the town's annual fall festival moved its stage closer to the statue. Musicians played with the hands rising behind them, and food vendors lined the street. For the first time, laughter and music filled the block, where once there had only been whispers. Jamal watched it all from his porch, quiet as always, a mug of coffee warming his hands. He didn't crave the spotlight. The work had never been about him. But as he saw people lay flowers at the base, or sit on the grass beneath the stone palms as if they were shelter. He understood. The peace had outgrown his backyard. One evening, Mr. Alvarez shuffled up the walk with his cane, gazing at the sculpture bathed in the pink glow of sunset. "Told you, son," he said, his voice gravelly but proud. "Stone outlasts rules." Jamal chuckled softly, nodding. "Guess it does." Behind them, a group of children lifted their arms to the sky, mimicking the stone hands. Their voices carried into the twilight. "We're reaching!" And in that moment, Jamal knew his grandmother's words had come true. The scars of the past had become something new, something lasting. A monument not just of stone, but of resilience, unity, and belonging. The HOA had tried to stop it, but now the statue stood unmovable, undeniable, a landmark, a story, the heart of Willow Creek.